Earlier today, the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office discovered that multiple incarcerated individuals escaped from custody.
When you hear New Orleans, you probably think of jazz music, Mardi Gras, and street parades. But right in the middle of this vibrant city lies one of the most controversial jails in the United States. It's called Orleans Parish Prison. And it's not famous for good reasons. Riots, floods, guards accused of abuse. This isn't just a story about a jail. It's about a system that keeps failing, again and again.
We have a big update at this hour. This just in, authorities have arrested an Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office maintenance worker in connection with the escape of 10 inmates.
Most recently, which resulted in the escape of 10 inmates from the prison in May 2025. An escape that captivated the nation while the manhunt for the 10 men ran day and night. But before we get into the problems, let's first see where this jail is and who it holds. Orleans Parish Prison, or OPP, is not just one building like you'd expect. It's actually a group of jail buildings, all run by the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office. Some people call it a jail, but it's officially called a parish prison, because that's what they call counties in Louisiana. It's located in New Orleans, just about 2 miles away from the French Quarter. That's the famous part of the city with all the jazz, food, and parades. So yeah, it's pretty shocking that right next to all that fun, there's a place that's been called one of the worst jails in America. Now here's the weird part. Most of the people locked up in OPP aren't even guilty yet. Yep, you heard that right. They're what's called pre-trial detainees. That just means they've been arrested and are waiting for their court dates. They haven't had a trial, haven't been found guilty of anything, but they're still behind bars. That's already a huge problem. Because imagine being stuck in jail for weeks or months, just waiting. And you haven't even been proven guilty. A lot of these people are poor, so they can't afford bail. They stay in jail simply because they don't have money to get out. So it's not just about safety or crime. It's also about poverty and a system that punishes people before their case is even heard. And that's where OPP starts to look less like a jail and more like a trap. You might think, well, if they were arrested, they probably did something wrong. But honestly, a lot of people there are locked up for small stuff, like missing court dates or low-level drug charges. And some don't even belong there at all. All right, let's talk about how things went really wrong at Orleans Parish Prison. Most recently, on May 16th, a little after midnight, 10 men escaped the Orleans Parish Prison through a hole in the wall behind the toilet. Of these 10 escapees, 6 of them have been charged with either murder or attempted murder. The men managed to escape their cells due to faulty locks, began tampering with a locked sliding cell door for about 20 minutes before pulling it off its tracks and gaining entry into the cell. Once inside, the group ripped off a toilet and sink unit in the cell and cut off horizontal bars from a hole behind the toilet that was used to connect pipes. After squeezing through the hole, the group fled through a loading dock, scaled a wall, then ran across the Interstate 10 highway. By 1:30 a.m., the group was outside the jail. The inmates weren't discovered missing until 8 hours after they escaped. During a routine head count, roughly 7 hours after escaping. This is just the latest in a storied history of failures at the prison. Since the 1990s, this place has had a really bad reputation. People who were locked up there, and even lawyers who visited, have been calling it unsafe for years. There were so many problems, it's honestly kind of shocking. First, overcrowding. Too many people, not enough space. Inmates were packed into tiny cells with barely any room to move or sleep. Then there's lack of medical care. If someone got sick or injured, help didn't come fast. Some people with serious health issues weren't treated properly, which made things way worse. And then, the biggest one, violence. Fights were super common. There were stories of inmates attacking each other, or even being beaten by the guards. Sometimes fights would break out, and no one stepped in to stop it. Another scary thing? Teenagers were put in with adults. Imagine being 16 or 17 and being locked up with full-grown men who were violent and aggressive. That's not just wrong. It's dangerous. But the worst moment came in 2005, during Hurricane Katrina. When the storm hit New Orleans, the jail got flooded. The power went out, and the guards just left. No joke. They abandoned the building. Inmates were left inside their cells in rising water, with no food, no clean water, and no help for days. Some people were screaming out of the windows, begging for help. Others were stuck in pitch-black cells, waist-deep in dirty water. There were even reports of people dying during this time. Eventually, rescue teams showed up and started evacuating them. Thousands of inmates were taken out of the prison, but by then, the damage was done. Many had been living in horrible, filthy conditions. Some were traumatized for life. When this became public, people were furious. News outlets started covering it. Human rights groups stepped in. Everyone was asking the same question: how could this happen in America? So after everything that happened, especially after the Hurricane Katrina disaster, people finally had enough. In 2013, the US Department of Justice stepped in and said, "Okay, this jail is out of control." They made the city sign something called a federal consent decree. It's basically a legal agreement that forces the jail to clean up its act. The court ordered Orleans Parish Prison to hire more trained staff, improve medical care, fix the mental health services, and most importantly, make the jail safer, especially from violence and suicide. It sounded like a big step in the right direction, and honestly, it was. For a while, there was hope that things might finally get better. But now fast forward over 10 years later, and guess what? Most of the same problems are still there. Yeah. Even after all that legal stuff, reports from 2021 and 2022 show that not much has really changed inside. One of the biggest issues? Inmate-on-inmate violence is still happening. People are still getting hurt in fights, and sometimes even worse. There's also a shortage of trained guards. A lot of the staff don't have proper training, or there just aren't enough of them around to control what's happening. And when it comes to mental health, things are still pretty bad. People who are dealing with depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, or other conditions aren't getting the help they need. Some are put in solitary confinement instead of getting therapy or medication. So even though there was a lawsuit, and even though the court said, "You need to fix this," the jail is still struggling. And that makes you wonder, what's the point of a legal agreement if no one is making sure it actually works? Now let's look at some real-life incidents. Some teenage boys, like 15 or 16 years old, were put into the same jail areas as full-grown adult men. You can already guess where this is going. These kids were beaten up, bullied, and in some cases, sexually assaulted by older inmates. And remember, they hadn't even been found guilty yet. They were just locked up waiting for court. Imagine being a teen and getting thrown into that kind of danger, all because the jail didn't separate minors from adults properly. It's just not okay. There was one inmate who had schizophrenia, a serious mental health condition. Instead of giving him any kind of help or therapy, the jail staff threw him into solitary confinement for weeks. No meds, no doctor, no nothing. Just him, a cold cell, and silence. That kind of isolation can mess with anyone's head. But for someone already struggling with mental illness, it's a nightmare. He ended up hurting himself because no one cared enough to help. In 2023, a bunch of jail staff were arrested. But not for doing their jobs, for doing the exact opposite. They were caught smuggling drugs, getting into inappropriate relationships with inmates, and even letting fights happen on purpose. Yeah, guards. The people who are supposed to keep things safe were actually making the jail more dangerous. It's like no one was watching the watchers. All of these stories show one thing. This place isn't just poorly run. It's dangerous on every level. And if stuff like this can happen to kids, to people with mental illness, and right under the noses of jail staff, then something is seriously wrong with how this prison is being run. Okay, so now let's look at the actual numbers behind Orleans Parish Prison. This isn't just about sad stories or bad luck. The data shows a bigger, deeper problem. According to a report by the Vera Institute of Justice, Orleans Parish has one of the highest jail incarceration rates in the entire US. That means, compared to most other places, way more people in New Orleans end up behind bars. And here's where it gets even more serious. 80% of the people in that jail are black. But black people make up less than 60% of New Orleans' population. So what does that tell us? It tells us that something's unfair about how people are being arrested and jailed. It's not balanced. It's not equal. Some communities are clearly being targeted more than others. Now here's another important number. 87% of the people in the jail haven't even been convicted of anything. That means almost 9 out of 10 inmates are just sitting there, waiting for their court date. They're not guilty. They haven't had a trial. They're just stuck. Why? Because most of them are too poor to pay bail. So if you've got money, you go home and wait for court. But if you don't, you stay locked up. That's not justice. That's just punishing people for being poor. So when you put all these numbers together, a jail packed with people who haven't had trials, a jail mostly filled with black men, a system where money decides your freedom, it stops looking like a normal jail and starts looking like something else entirely. It's basically a mass detention center for poor and minority citizens. All right, so after years of terrible conditions and public outrage, people started speaking up. There have been real efforts to fix Orleans Parish Prison. Activists, community leaders, and even some former inmates have been protesting, holding meetings, and pushing for major changes. First, they want a smaller and better managed jail. Instead of building bigger jails and locking up more people, they say the focus should be on better safety, mental health care, and fair treatment. Second, they're calling for more funding for mental health programs. A lot of people in the jail are struggling with depression, anxiety, or other issues. Activists believe they don't belong in a jail at all. They need help, not punishment. And third, they want to end pre-trial detention for low-risk people. Basically, if someone isn't dangerous and hasn't even been found guilty yet, why keep them locked up? Especially if the only reason they're in jail is because they couldn't pay bail. Sounds fair, right? But not everyone agrees. Some city officials and law enforcement leaders say New Orleans still has a lot of violent crime, and that the jail needs to be bigger, not smaller. They argue that releasing too many people could make the city less safe. So now there's this big argument going on. One side says, we need reform, we need fairness. Stop locking up poor people who haven't even gone to trial. The other side says, we need to protect the city. We need more space to deal with crime. It's a tough fight, because both public safety and human rights matter. But how do you balance them? That's the real question. And while the debate continues, people are still being held in bad conditions. So you might be thinking, why does this one jail in New Orleans matter so much? Well, here's the thing. Orleans Parish Prison isn't just one messed up place. It's a warning sign for what can go wrong in the entire prison system. This jail shows what happens when there's no transparency, meaning nobody really sees what's happening inside. When there's no accountability, meaning no one gets punished when things go wrong. And when the people in power have too much control over those who can't fight back. That's a dangerous combo. And what's even scarier, most of the people in OPP haven't been convicted of anything yet. They're not criminals, they're just accused and waiting for their day in court. But they still get locked up in dirty cells, with no medical help, no mental health care, and no real protection. If this can happen to people who haven't even been found guilty yet, what does that say about our justice system? It tells us that sometimes it's not about guilt or innocence. It's about how much money you have, or where you come from, or what you look like. If this video helped you understand what's really going on, give it a like, share it with someone, and hit that subscribe button for more stuff like this.